Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend it here with Elliot and I. I'm Andrea Nellestyn, Candidate Marketing Specialist here at Peak Sales Recruiting, and sitting beside me is none other than Eliot Burdett, co-founder of Peak. Elliot, thanks so much for spending your day with us today.
Excited to be on your show.
Excellent, thank you. So before we get into it, I just want to mention a couple of things. We will be having a Q&A session towards the end of the session. So if something comes up and you want to ask a question and have Elliot address it before the end of the webinar, don't hesitate, write it into the Q&A section. You can click the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen, and we'll definitely try to address it before the end of the show. So without further ado, why don't we get started? So really just wanted to start by asking you, Elliot, if you could give us a bit of a brief overview of your background.
Sure.
I know, a lot of the people that are tuning in today might not be acquainted with Peak or with yourself. So thought it would be best to just start off by telling us a little bit about that.
Sure.
Excellent.
So I spent most of my career building and running high growth sales teams and marketing operations. I spent most of the 90s in the internet and web software space. Sold my first startup in the late 90s, then spent 6 or 7 years in the mobile software space. And then worked a lot with sales teams over in some other companies over the latter part of that time, and then started to Peak in 2006.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what led you to get into the recruiting business?
Interesting. This is an interesting story because it's sort of an unusual path to go from tech into recruiting, mm-hmm. I think in a lot of ways. And a lot of my friends sort of, asked me why recruiting. And it's an interesting story because we figured out a way to solve a problem experienced by almost every company in the world. And that is when you're running high growth sales teams and building, high growth companies, you have a high need for great salespeople, and there's a lot of open seats. And I always struggled with how to find those great salespeople. And the more I spoke to other business leaders, the more I realized that problem is universal, and mm-hmm. that every organization struggles with how to find great salespeople. But I actually realized that it's actually two problems, not just one. One is finding great salespeople to put on your team, and the other is finding enough of those great salespeople. The other is identifying who's mm-hmm. great. And a lot of organizations struggle with that as well. And I think our success over the years has been a real testament to the size of that market opportunity back then, and still is an enormous market opportunity.
Well, that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because as an entrepreneur, you've started numerous organizations and led, many sales teams. And I know you have a lot of friends and other people, in your network that are entrepreneurs as well. Why is it so hard to find great salespeople?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. It's a few parts to this. First of all, what is a great salesperson? And probably different people have different definitions, but in our minds, it's somebody who consistently meets or exceeds quota, and in all conditions. So, in good economies, bad economies, and in various company situations of maturity and that type of thing. And so we're looking at the number of people that fit that definition are probably 10%, maybe 15% at most of the sales population. So by definition, the great salespeople are rare. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the reason we're talking about great salespeople as opposed to just any salespeople is that in order to be successful or to achieve big targets, you need great salespeople. You need people that are, virtually guaranteed to be successful players. Yeah. And so they're rare. The other part of it is that great salespeople are not looking for jobs. They're what we call passive candidates. They are gainfully employed. They're in most of them are in good situations. There's probably a small percentage that might be inclined to move, but realistically, they're in front of customers. They're selling. They're on planes. They're doing deals. They're not looking at job ads. They're not perusing, career websites, and they're not stumbling across your job ad for your open position. So you got to go get them, mm-hmm. which is difficult for a lot of organizations because, what is, me as a sales leader, what am I doing? I'm I'm in front of customers, I'm chasing deals, I'm doing all the same things, and I just don't have time to go and hunt for those 10 to 15%.
Right, right. I guess the other question that I have is, it's hard to find great salespeople, but how do you identify who is the right salesperson to bring onto your organization? I mean, we know that every organization has their own unique selling environment. So how can you pinpoint and identify who that person's going to be?
Right, and so this was the other challenge that we were so excited about addressing when we originally started the company, is that the traits of a successful or a great salesperson are not well understood. So if I were to get a group of executives in a room, hopefully they've hired a lot of salespeople and have a pretty good opinion on what makes a great salesperson, but I would get a pretty broad diversity of opinions on one, what makes a great salesperson, and two, what are the traits that would cause, what are the characteristics, what are the common traits of those sales people, what would make them, what are the traits that would make a salesperson successful? Mm-hmm. And those things are, I wouldn't get a ton of consensus on what those traits are, but we're talking about things, things that, so we go past experiences, which might be the obvious ones, and having worked for certain companies or had certain selling experiences, but we get into things like the DNA of a person, the sales DNA, as we call it, and those are things like confidence, optimism, competitiveness, need to influence others, ambition, drive, and so you start to see that's you're going to get much more variety and opinion on which of those things matter. And I think we have a very unique perspective on that because of our the volume of work that we do in this business, and having seen tens of thousands of successful salespeople and seeing what's common between them. And then another part of it is that those things are difficult for organizations to assess. So it's one thing to when we do workshops with our customers and we get them to start getting them thinking about their requirements and what they're looking for in a successful hire. It's one thing to get them to agree on the traits that we're looking for. It's quite another thing to get them to agree on how you assess those. And so if I were to ask business people, how do you assess confidence or optimism or drive, ambition, those types of things, perseverance, then it gets a lot more murkier. And so that makes it very difficult. And then layer on the fact that salespeople are trained to sell, so they're going to come into an interview, and it's not always obvious who's a great one, who's an average one and who's Absolutely. Not a very good one. And so that makes it very difficult for most hiring managers to get a sense of whether somebody is, which bucket they fit into. Salespeople sell, they come into interviews. So successful interviewing is often like peeling the layers of an onion. Mm-hmm. And the modern sales organization, and it just, we're layering on issues here, but this is all, why we had this issue. The modern sales organization is very complex. So we have, it's no longer hunters and farmers anymore. Now we have very specific roles. We have direct selling roles. We have regional sales managers. We have DSRs. We have support roles. We have sales in tech sales. We have field sales, engineering support, that type of thing. And so now you're starting to look at really specific traits and characteristics that will make somebody successful in a role. And then we could layer on, culture and values fit, which might further refine whether somebody's successful here or there. Mm-hmm. So it starts to get that, you start to get a picture of all of these layers of complexity, what make it difficult for an organization to identify who's the right person, who's likely to succeed in the organization. Yeah.
Right. Before I go into my next question, just want to remind the viewers to type in a question in the Q&A section as opposed to raising your hand. We want to hear from you, so certainly, type in anything that you want to ask, and we'll try to go over that. So you mentioned how complex it can be, to identify the right sales candidate. So I guess from you, I'm curious to know what some of the things are that sales leaders can do to mitigate the risk of a mishire.
Right. Great question, and we get asked this a lot by our customers too, because obviously they're coming to engagement. We're helping them both finding great people and choosing the right people. It starts with profiling exactly what you're looking for, and that sort of sounds like motherhood in a way, because organizations say, well, of course we have job definitions, but when we profile what we're looking for, we have our customers define the characteristics of the person beyond simply years experience or diploma or certificate, that type of thing. We're looking for the traits. So again, we're looking at the optimism, the drive, and whatever is specific to that role. So we develop a profile which encompasses skills, experience, and DNA. That would be the first part of it. The second part would be to do an extensive hire, an extensive search, so that you're making sure to look everywhere. If you place an ad and 10 people apply, you're going to pick the best of 10. If you have a search strategy where you're going out to go across the whole market, you're more likely to find the best candidate in the market, as opposed to the best candidate that happens to apply.
Right.
That would be another part of it. The other would be that you have to have an objective assessment process, so that when you're interviewing candidates, you're removing gut feel from the process. There's a tendency, there's a lot of cognitive biases that occur in interviewing, where we have a tendency to hear the things we want to hear. So if a hiring manager or a sales VP is under a lot of pressure, they're going to feel a lot of pressure to pick a person. They're going to feel a lot of pressure to fill a seat, and they're more inclined then to hear the answers they want to hear from the candidate, as an example. And it may so there's a bunch of cognitive biases that come to play, halo effect, and attributing positive characteristics to somebody who doesn't necessarily have the traits that we're looking for. So we have a structured hiring process and assessment process that we would help our customers implement, so that they can pick, they can remove the gut, they can see what the facts of the situation, and pick a person that is really ultimately fits their profile and highly suited to be successful in the role. And I guess there's a couple of other. First of all, it can be difficult for organizations to have that rigor when you're pursuing top candidates, and because those people are employed, you're chasing them. It's a lot different than somebody applying to your job, right? And those people are going to be, doing everything. They're going to jump through the hoops. They're going to do everything that you put them, every test that you put them through, they're going to do it happily. Whereas if somebody is what we call a passive candidate and they're currently employed, there's a lot more. It needs to be a lot more emphasis on assessing them while also courting them. So doing it without it feeling like an interrogation, which might not feel good to somebody that's applying for your organization. So we do all of that, and you don't want to settle. You want to make sure that you're not picking the first person available. And then the last part would be onboarding, because the hiring process really doesn't end when the person signs a paper and joins your company.
Sure.
Success. There's effectively, that person is still, the honeymoon period goes on afterwards, and they're still interviewing with a new employer after they join the company. And so it's really incumbent on an organization to make sure that success happens for that person. So the onboarding with the training and the getting used to the products and the way they sell and the other parts of the organization, that's so critical, because organizations can still fumble the ball after they hire. It would be it's such a shame. You've spent all this effort to find and pick a great person, and then to have them self-select out in a short period of time after you've because you're not at the goal line. So it has to include onboarding.
Yeah, and we'll certainly discuss that a bit more later on. But so this might be a tough question. I'm sorry for throwing it at you, but if you had one question, only one question to ask in a sales interview, what would that be?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't ask one question. I don't think you can. Humans are too complex, and particularly in our experience, salespeople, they're too complex to boil down to one question that would identify whether they're here or there. So, and I'll get into that. But let's say I only have one question. I would probably ask. I would probably ask how can you demonstrate a pattern of increasing achievements over your career? Because what I'm looking for is that they've been successful, and each success has been a stepping stone to another success. And through answering that question, I think I get a lot of information about how they were successful and the process by which they had been successful. But as I said, so that would give me a sense of, because I want, top achievers have a pattern of increasing successes and increasing accomplishments, and that might be in sales numbers, or size of accounts, or big wins, marquee accounts, that type of thing, whatever the role is. But to properly assess people, you need to ask when you're peeling the onion, you need to look at a sales candidate a lot of different ways. So we would be looking at the background and asking all sorts of situational questions, and asking, what transpired in various situations that are relevant to the role that they're going into. We'd be looking at behaviors, so we'd do what's called behavioral-based interviewing. So one of the best predictors of how somebody's going to behave in the future, which is critically important, is how they behaved in the past in a similar situation. Sure. So we would be asking, and just for those who aren't familiar with behavioral-based interviewing, rather than asking, what would you do when you come into our organization and take over this territory, we ask, what did you do in the past when you took over a territory that's very similar to ours? And then, we'd ask them to lay out how they built a plan, or how they dealt with similar challenges that they're going to face in this situation. Right. So we look at behavioral-based interviewing. We would look at some role plays to get a sense of the type of person they are, and further confirm the behavior that they say they've conducted themselves in the way in the past. And we'd look at psychometric testing as another layer, which is we have some very powerful science and statistically accurate tests that to give us a sense of which traits correlate with success in which roles. And so, you start laying around all these things, which give you each time you're just increasing the certainty that a person is going to be successful in a role. Humans are humans, and there are no guarantees in life, but you can certainly, that the average failure rate for people in new roles is anywhere between 30 to 50% based on the organization. So that's by layering on these different techniques, you can significantly decrease that and eliminate to near perfection the likelihood of success in a salesperson.
Okay. I just want to pivot a little bit here, because I really want to discuss culture. This has been, the center of the conversation for a while now, I think, for many organizations, and it's becoming increasingly important. So from your perspective, how important or how big of a role does culture play in sales hiring? Yeah,
culture is huge. Culture is critically important, and maybe it always was, but I think more and more we're seeing an emphasis on values and purpose, and there's certainly a fair amount of research that would indicate that the millennial generation cares more about this than previous generations. There's some really interesting research from Deloitte about 4 or 5 years ago, where they looked at culture and the degree to which it matters to employees, and certainly a high percentage of employees in their surveys indicated that it absolutely matters. But what was really interesting is that the correlation between successful organizations, the employees that said it mattered, and those employees that said they're happy, was really interesting. So there's a high correlation between happy employees and employees that said that their organizations had strong culture. And we know that happy salespeople sell more. Happy salespeople mean happy customers, and happy customers usually mean happy organizations. And so it's critically important that organizations address culture.
Yeah. Okay. That's fantastic. So, if it is so important, then how can we effectively assess cultural fit, right, in a candidate when you're interviewing them?
Yeah. We would talk to organizations about, first, an organization has to understand its culture. It has to understand what values it espouses and which values are important to it. For the most modern and progressive organizations, values are not only something that are seen on the walls, but it's also something that is is part of the mantra. It's part of their dialogue and communications in the office. It's how they reward people. It's how they reprimand people. It's how they choose. So the first thing would be that if values and culture are important in your organization, would be to make them part of the hiring process. And so we would help organizations try to figure out how to assess the values of candidates so that they can make sure there's an alignment between an organization's values and an employee's values. And so we'd be looking at values fit. We would also be encouraging our customers to be very disciplined about, it's one thing to have it on your walls. It is, and I've seen it in practice, it's a completely different thing to say that we will not hire somebody who doesn't fit with our values.
Yes.
And if your organization is committed to that, and Peak is an organization like that. We've had the luxury and the honor of working with other organizations that are like that. You get to a point where the culture is so strong that that you'll almost reject somebody that doesn't fit, and it sounds almost crude, but like a virus, and that it almost becomes like a barrier to people that don't fit the culture. But it's a conscious decision to make that part of the hiring process. So we would help organizations bring that into their interviewing and assessment.
Absolutely, it just makes makes it such a stronger team when an organization lives by those values.
And I can speak from personal experience, having not appreciated that earlier in my career, and I can liken it to, it's like if you were on a rowing team and you had a dozen rowers, and each of them are splashing about at different cadences and in different directions. The difference between an organization that doesn't know its culture and doesn't place an emphasis on that, and one that does, and that's paramount, is the difference between rowers splashing around and one where everyone's just clipping along and you're humming. You could debate the business value of that, but I can tell you get a whole lot more sleep when the culture is a priority.
Yes, no, I can imagine. So I just want to talk about remote salespeople for a second, because I'm sure a lot of the sales leaders that are watching us right now, have a team that's sort of spread out geographically. Does culture matter when a salesperson is remote?
Absolutely. I don't think it matters whether, you're close to the executive suite on the outside, in a branch office or in a remote office. Everyone needs to, in order for the organization to thrive, everyone needs to be part of that culture and to live the values. Yeah, 100%.
Okay. So we've learned now how to identify the right candidate. I really want to go into now, sort of take a step forward and talk about how to attract that top performer. Like, how does an organization attract that A+ candidate?
Yeah, we get this question a lot too from our customers. So you might have heard of the concept of being an employer of choice, and this is it's critically important, because the difference between being an employer of choice and or not is the difference between being able to attract top level talent versus having the leftovers. There's a saying that A players attract A players and B players attract C players. I've seen this played out dozens of times, and it's absolutely true. And there's also a cost factor, because organizations that are an employer of choice consciously invest more in being an employer of choice, but the benefits are in terms of being able to get great people coming to them, but also there's a cost advantage. They don't have to, in a lot of cases, don't have to pay as much as other players in the industry that are fighting for other people. So first of all, it's critically important. And so how to become an employer of choice? The first thing would be, there's a bunch of things that impact it, but marketing, brand, and reputation would be huge, because a lot of times, people might hear about a job opportunity or be contacted by a recruiter, and one of the first things they're going to do is they're going to look at the website, and they're going to look at the reputation. We work for a lot of very large customers that are relatively unknown because they're not household names, or they don't you know, they don't have commercials at Super Bowl time,
Mm-hmm.
but highly successful companies, and they invest a lot in a great reputation, so that when you go to their website, you read their history of achievements and press releases and whatnot, you obviously are impressed by their sort of a prestige associated with them, and that helps a ton in being an employer of choice, I guess. Another thing would be being known as a great place to work, and that gets into the culture. Again, if people are excited about working for a company, and that's a place where they do the best work, well, they're likely, you know, they're likely to be proud of it, and they're likely to tell their friends, and that you know, that just gets out on the street and circulates. And you know, the opposite of that is that companies that don't have that, you know, or they have negative press or bad reputation, or there's a lot of turnover, that also hits the street, and so that it prevents, you know, being an employer of choice. So those would be a couple of the big ones. But from a salesperson's perspective, there's a perception that salespeople are risk oriented. So therefore, you know, there's a you know, they're going to like a new thing, or they're going to like an aggressive comp plan. But the reality is that a top performing salesperson, you know, might be making $250, $350, $450K a year, and a big chunk of that is going to be commissioned. Salespeople don't make money by moving around.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, when you have open seats, you want to go get great people, and they're employed somewhere else, they're hitting quota, or they're exceeding quota.
Right.
They're making a lot of money, and you know, only a portion of that would be salary. Another portion of that is commission.
Right.
And so they've earned that over time. They didn't get there because they bounced around. They got there because they got one place. They built up domain knowledge and customer relationships, and they built up a run rate to get them to that point.
Yep.
So it's extremely risky for them to switch roles.
Absolutely.
Because they're compensated. So let's hypothetically, you're earning $500,000 a year. 50% of that is in commission, or let's say 2/3 of that in commission. And now you go to a new company, you're gambling a portion of that.
Absolutely.
Even if you're, you know, at the lower level, let's say a typical comp plan might be 50-50. So if a person's earning, you know, 150, so 75 base and 75 commission, you're gambling that 75K. And for a lot of people, that's extremely risky. So you can't underestimate that when you're marketing to a candidate and bringing it to try to get them into your organization. You can't be cavalier about, this is a new opportunity, and don't worry, you know, don't sweat the small stuff. You know, you're going to miss out. You have to show them what percentage of your sales team is successful. You have to show them how you're going to ensure that they're successful. You might even have to do draws and commission and guarantees for a certain period of time to soften the blow of them transitioning into your organization. But you have to de-risk it for that person so that they can see a pathway to becoming into your organization and achieving or exceeding the success they had wherever they were before. And certainly, and finances is only one part of it. So paying at or above market is a great way to be an employer of choice. Paying below market is a great way to compromise your chances of attracting the best.
But also what the growth opportunities are for them, right? I mean, aside from the financial gain, what are the growth opportunities? You know, what's in it for them?
Right, and people, you know, and people join organizations. You know, it's not just money. I would say, you know, there's a lot of research that you know people do think that money is only a minor motivation in people's decision to make a change, and I think that's a pretty popular concept at the moment, and it might even be more popular in millennial, but it's actually, you know, I've been doing this for years. And rarely is money not the top thing or top two things that people ask about. So even if the research shows it's not important, it's top of mind for everyone that moves. And so money, but you're absolutely right. And you talk about culture. People, you know, people sense that stuff, and they want to go to an organization where they feel they fit and that they can do their best work, and they can be proud of the work that they do. Absolutely.
Right. So we've identified who the best sales talent is for organization. We've attracted them. We've hired them. They're doing phenomenally well. They're overachieving consistently quarter after quarter. So now that's what we all want.
Love it.
How do we keep them happy while they're there? Well, how do we keep them engaged? You know?
Yeah. So engagement is an interesting topic too, because engagement for a lot of our organizations is something that they struggle with. And so let's talk about how organizations, have the different ways of engaging. So the one, leadership has to be engaged. So if the top executives in a company need to be excited and passionate about the business and the mission, the vision, the top executives have to be involved. They have to be there in the trenches with the team. The leadership in a company has to be having fun. Like, I mean, work. All work is not fun, but it's a good mix. And so leadership has to be engaged themselves. There has to be an organizational commitment to engagement. So the cultural and values things that we talked about, all of those are critically important in engaging. There has to be involvement of employees, and you get higher levels of engagement when the staff and the team members are involved in the planning, and there's transparency, and they understand where the organization is going, why decisions are made. So more communication is good, and that helps engagement. And then organizations that are committed to engagement also need to encourage their employees to be engaged. So it's it's not just the organization and leadership on the team, but it's also encouraging the team to engage themselves. And so things like mentoring and sharing information, these are all other ways of, and beyond the team events and that type of thing, which most companies have, tend to be good at. So those are pretty, really important things.
Yeah. So, we all know we're living in a war for talent. If you have an A+ player at your organization, I can pretty much guarantee that you have other organizations that are vying for them as well. Yeah. Right. So
as you should, actually. That's almost it's a badge of honor. If other companies are trying to get your people, I mean, I know a lot of organizations are defensive about that and really nervous about that, but it's a badge of honor. Yeah. I mean, if you've got great people, if all the recruiters are lined up at your door, it means you're doing something right.
That's
You've
true.
got to protect that asset,
but you don't necessarily want to give them up, though,
no,
right?
Course,
so how do you keep them?
Yeah. So I mean, and Peak is an organization that helps its customers get great talent. So obviously, we also have a lot of insight into why people leave. And there's a lot of reasons why people leave, which is the flip side of retention. But, salespeople leave if they feel they can earn more money elsewhere.
Right.
If they're not set up to succeed, if they feel that the organization is not honoring their hard work, maybe there's problems elsewhere in the organization that is preventing sales from happening. If the salespeople feel that they're not proud of their work, they're not enjoying the work, and being successful is not all sunshine and roses. There's a lot of tough work that goes into being successful. Nobody makes great money without hard work and overcoming obstacles. But if an organization isn't able to make that person happy and successful, they're going to start looking elsewhere. And then cultural fit, chemistry with the people around them. If there's not a commitment to hiring other great people, so if I'm a great salesperson surrounded by other people that aren't of the same caliber, I might at some point want to go and be part of a team where we're all great players. And on the one hand, I might be able to be at the top of the leaderboard, and that's easy. But we interview people that are at the top of the leaderboard, but they want to go and it's too easy for them. And they want to go and fight with other people where they're constantly, they feel more pressure to stay at the top as opposed to walk through. So there's a lot of different reasons, but those are all things that organizations need to address in order to keep the best talent. You've got to engage. And so it's a lot of the things that we've been talking about. You've got to engage that, because happy, engaged employees that feel that they're in the right organization because their values fit with the organization and they're doing great work and they're getting paid. They feel that they're getting paid at or above market, or they couldn't go anywhere else. And those people don't leave. Yeah. It doesn't matter how many recruiting calls they get. They don't leave.
Yeah. No, that's very true. Okay, so there are definitely some occasions, and we know this very well because these are the reasons why our customers come to us, right? When it's just the best business decision is to bring on an external recruiting partner. You know, your HR organization has been working on it, your sales leaders have been working on it, but sometimes it just makes the most sense to bring in the professionals, right? So what maybe we could share with our audience what those, you know, when that is the best business decision.
Yeah. Well, so there'd be a lot of different reasons why you might use a recruiter. I guess first of all, if probably the easiest one is if your organization doesn't have an internal recruiting department, then I guess take a step back. I would always encourage organizations to do it themselves first. So a lot of my friends, my other executives come to me and say, you know, how can I do this? Well, so the first question is, do you have internal recruiting or not? But if probably the best and cheapest way is to ask your employees, tap your network, ask for referrals, and place job ads if you know, and see if that works. And employee referrals is probably one of the best ways to get candidates to come to your organization, because you know, if your employees are engaged and they understand your culture and what you're looking for, they're probably in the best position just to say, I know somebody else who would love it here, and then they can, conversely, they can vouch for that person and say, and I think they would really fit in well. So that's the first thing. But if your organization doesn't have the resources internally to do a search, you know, then that would be one obvious reason to use a recruiter. If your internal organization doesn't have, you know, you've got an internal recruiting organization, but maybe they're maxed out because there's a lot of hiring going on, you're going through a growth spurt, and you need to augment, or you want to really expand the reach of a search and go extensive, then that would be a great reason to use a recruiter to tap into the networks of, so Peak, for example, has access to literally thousands and thousands of salespeople in every major location in different sectors of different types. And so you exponentially expand your reach by using a recruiter that has has a network and a database of candidates that they've have been pre-screened and set up for you. Another reason might be if your success rates aren't where you want them to be. So we talked before about it's hard to get access to great salespeople. So and Peak can certainly help with that. But if your organization hasn't traditionally had great success in picking salespeople, and by success I mean, you know, if you were to take the number of salespeople you hire and look at the ratio of those versus the number of salespeople that stay or hit quota or successful or whatever your metrics are, you know, at a certain time, and that ratio is below what it should be or below where you want it to be, or it's causing turnover that's impairing your ability to grow, then a recruiter can also help bring some rigor and some process to your own hiring process, and ultimately help you pick a better person, or they should be able to anyway. Peak certainly comes in with a structure that I don't want to make this sound like a commercial, but it's hard not to draw from my own experience. But you know, Peak comes in with a structure where we're going to help you assess objectively, and you know, it would be it just doesn't happen that your success rate doesn't increase, and so once you have that rigor to it, so. That would be another thing, and I think maybe another part of it is speed. So you know, there's reach, there's accuracy, there's speed. So you throw resources at it, and you know, we can compress a lot of organizations that come to us after they've spent, you know, 3, 6, 9 months trying to fill up you know, their positions, and then we can accelerate that down and compress the hiring time, because we're bringing the candidates that they need to the table far more quickly, and you know, and that problem is just multiplied. You know, when if you know, it's one thing if you're trying to hire one person, but if you're trying to do a Salesforce refresh and you need 50 people, you know, that just gets far more complicated. And then finally, there's an element of cost. I think would be the other reason is that when a lot of organizations don't do a lot of sales hiring, or at least maybe their internal organization is splitting their time between sales hiring and maybe hiring engineers and maybe hiring other managers or finance, whatever, what have you. And so there's an element of we have an economy of scale where, you know, we understand one thing exceptionally well, which means that we can bring an economy of scale and cost efficiencies to our customers by when they bring us in to help augment their own efforts. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. So I think we've covered a lot of good stuff today. Certainly, I hope our audience has gotten a lot of value out of this conversation. And I see that we have a couple of questions that I'd like to get to if you are okay with that, Elliot. So first question is from Jill, actually, and she wants to know, from a compensation perspective, what do you need, or what does it take to get top talent to move?
Great question. The short answer is that you're going to have to pay at or above market with guarantees, and obviously market is different in every market. So what somebody might have to pay a salesperson in to a top salesperson or top percentile salesperson in Cincinnati might be completely different than what you'd have to pay in LA or the Bay Area or New York. First of all, and what percentage above market? Anything. In a lot of cases, when you combine the characteristics of a role and an organization, if it's an employer of choice, you might not have to pay much above market or even just matching and offer a higher opportunity for success. But you're probably safe anywhere between single digits to 30 points above market. And we were talking about total compensation, not the base. So again, if it's a rep at 150K target income or total target income at quota, then that's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about the base, whatever breakdown that might be. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
But you'd have to know your market. And I can't comment on
yes.
It's going to be contingent on role. So is it an account management versus account executive role? Is it management versus individual contributor? Is it support versus direct? And then it's going to be contingent on the whatever market and sector too, frankly, because what's top in manufacturing might be completely different than what's top in software.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. We also have a question from Kara. Kara wants to sort of go back to the employer of choice conversation. So what are some of the ways that you can differentiate yourself from the competition as an employer of choice if you have a similar solution or product?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. This is a great question because in a lot of cases, two organizations that are direct competitors are actually very different. And I would argue, selling software for Oracle is a lot different than selling software for a SaaS player that might also be in the ERP space or an enterprise space. And so how can you differentiate yourself? Well, first of all, it just goes right back to marketing, right? So how is your organization different? Because I'd argue that no two organizations are ever the same. They're probably quite different in terms of how they attack the market. And we didn't talk about it, but one of the things that makes organizations different is the selling environment. So things like the size of a typical sale, the selling approach and the methodology that might be used. So maybe one organization it's freestyle, and another organization it's very structured. Maybe they're using a sales methodology like Sandler or the Challenger sale, or so it can be a contrast there. It could be a culture of the organization. The culture of the sales department within the organization can be different. You can have different leadership styles even within the sales organization. You might have different maturity of the industry and then the company within that industry. So you get sort of you can have a situation where one person, you can't just steal from your direct competitor because the person that does really well over here might be really well suited over there, but not over here.
Yeah,
and so how do you differentiate yourself? I think you go back to all of those things that make your company great,
right?
And you build them. You make them part of your hiring process and your employer branding and what makes you an employer of choice. And all of those things that contrast you against a company that might on the surface seem similar or might even be a direct competitor is what makes you different, and what also makes somebody well suited for you, not them.
Right, which goes back to identification, right? Being able to
Absolutely.
identify who that right person is for
Yeah.
your unique environment, and then you can circle that back to culture as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So great question, thanks so much. So we have another question. This is from Scott. So Scott would like to know how he can find an A+ player in his niche space when he already knows everybody. So clearly small industry or small vertical, and would like to know if if he has to, if he has to go outside of his industry or his niche, what qualifications should he flex on, and what should he stick to?
I really, Scott, I'm glad you asked this question. I really like this question because it's so it's very common for employers when they're looking to hire somebody to start with, I want somebody who's sold for X years in my industry, which, and obviously successful. And then they might layer some other things, if they're progressive, they're gonna add culture, and they might get into, and they might look at other traits and skills, let's say, things that might make somebody successful. But I think one of the best ways, and when you look in your industry, the pool is usually going to be pretty small, because if you're looking for somebody who's sold to your customers, in your sector to your customers, and ideally that gets the way you sell, you start to, if you layer on, book of business, I mean, you're going to write down to a small pool of candidates, which means automatically you won't have a lot of choice, and you're probably going to have to pay a lot to get a great person. So one of the best ways to expand your pool is to back up to what are the traits that make somebody successful on your team.
Right.
In a lot of cases, when we look at, when we go in and audit a sales team and we look at who's been successful, it's pretty surprising that the people that are at the top of the team didn't come from the industry.
Yeah.
They might have been, you get some bizarre stories, and they might have come from outside the industry. And like I can remember, we looked at a sales team one time, and it was in the Bay Area, had a sales team of about 35 people, and their top salesperson, and they were selling software into the enterprise space, the top salesperson had a shoe sales background.
Really?
Like you'd never
Wow.
have predicted. Yeah. You'd never have predicted. And so what we do is we don't just look at the backgrounds, but we look at the traits of somebody who's successful. Now, we know from experience in various types of roles, we're going to see, we're used to seeing certain characteristics, like I sort of touched on before. So if we're talking about account execs who are responsible for predominantly new business, we're going to see a drive, high ambition. We're going to see perseverance. We're going to see optimism, confidence. We're going to see a need to influence others. Often we're going to see a high sense of personal internal control, and almost always a pretty high degree of need for money. It's a currency as a motivator, and so we look at those traits. And when you lift off industry experience and you just look at the traits that will drive somebody to be successful, if you get a smart person who has the right traits, they will outpace somebody that has the right experience but the wrong traits.
Yes.
100 times out of 100 times. And so a way to expand your pool is to look at the traits. And of course, if they come with industry experience and domain knowledge, and that's icing on the cake because the learning curve is short. But a smart person with the right traits will be shockingly effective in many situations. And so that's one of the ways you can expand your pool beyond the people that you know in your own personal network.
Right.
Or in your industry.
Right. Okay, that's perfect. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. We're out of time already. It seems like it was just a few minutes of speaking here, but we should definitely do this again. So, to thank everyone for joining us today, we want to give you some exclusive access to some content that we've developed over the past year. So, number one is the Salesforce sizing guide. This is a great piece of content for sales leaders looking to grow, or grow a sales team from scratch, or even grow an existing sales team. Second one is a Salesforce culture study. This is something that our marketing team worked very hard on, and I think will really provide a lot of value and more insight into how important culture is to a sales organization. And third is a Salesforce interviewing guide. You know, as you said, sales interviewing is much different than you know, if you're interviewing an engineer or
these things.
something.
Make your life easier.
It can be very complex. So once we'll send you the recording after the session, about 24 hours later. When you do receive that, shoot me an email. I will be more than happy to send you those pieces of content for your review. And we'd like to continue the engagement. So looking forward to continuing the conversation after today. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
See you again. Thanks, Elliot.
Thank you.